Hello, amigo, and welcome back to the Creatively Coffee podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Tullis. I'm recording this from my home in Colonia Mirador, Ciudad Victoria, Tamaulipas, Mexico, right at the foothills of the gorgeous, beautiful Sierra Madre mountain range. My dog is running through the apartment like crazy, like usual. And it is 1:35 p.m. on a Thursday as I record this episode and send it out to you. This is episode 22. Now, if you're watching this in video form on YouTube, then this is my way of telling you this is also a podcast and you can download the podcast episodes. The podcast came before the videos. The dog is still running like crazy because that's what she does. And if you're listening to the podcast, as maybe you have from the beginning, this is my way of saying it's also in video form. So you can go to YouTube and find the Creatively Coffee podcast, and you can uh, check out my incredibly attractive, um, outlandishly symmetric face in video form. And until you check out in video, you should totally imagine that I just basically look like a way more intelligent, thoughtful, intellectual version of Brad Pitt. So today I want to talk about um, trusting the system. That's something I talked about in the last episode. And I have here with me, I want to show you this stack of papers. If you're listening to the podcast version, you're not missing a lot. This is a stack of papers, of pages that I'm holding in my hand. The top page is labeled Miss Piggy. That's the name of my Zettelkasten. This stack of pages is my Zettelkasten note-taking system, my analog Zettelkasten note-taking system. There are probably a few hundred notes here. It isn't anything crazy. It's still in its baby form. It's just barely getting started. It will eventually one day be thousands or even perhaps tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of notes organized in a very interesting and precise way that I can probably talk about more in a different episode. But I want to talk about the Zettelkasten. And by the way, I use slips of paper. These are quarter pages. So basically what I do is I take letter size 8x5 by 11-inch printer paper that you can just find anywhere. And I divide those pages into quarters. And 1/4 of a sheet of printer paper is pretty close to an A6 page of paper for the Europeans out there. Not exactly, but pretty close. Another way to get pretty close is to get a 4x6-inch index card. For a couple of reasons, I prefer to do it this way than getting index cards. For one thing, index cards aren't always super easy to find, especially down in Mexico where I live. Letter-sized printer paper is always easy to find anywhere in the world, probably. So that's one reason I like to use this. Also, am very concerned about space. Right now, this is a stack of pages I can just hold in one hand. Eventually, if this becomes tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of pages, you can just imagine how unwieldy that can get very quickly. Nicholas Luhmann, the man who pioneered and evolved the modern concept of the analog Zettelkasten to its basically its current form, while others are sort of taking that torch and continuing the process, the evolution process. I might consider myself one of those pioneers in this space, or I might one day consider myself a pioneer in this space. Right now, I'm just a disciple. I'm learning as I go. But Nicholas Luhmann, he was also very concerned about space for a different reason than I am concerned about space. I'm concerned about space because I live in Mexico. I spend at least part of my time in the United States. Um, it's important for me to be geo-independent, to be able to travel, to be able to move as family situation, work situation, other situations change. I need to be able to move around, to be somewhat agile. So keeping keeping my note system as compact as possible is important to me. Nicholas Luhmann, he was concerned about space also because he had a small office and he wanted to keep his entire note system in one place, in one office. And so he used the thinnest sheets possible. And so I'm sort of following in that same vein, using the thinnest sheets possible compared to index cards, which would be at least twice as thick as regular printer paper. But I digress. That's not really what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk about this. You know, I spend maybe an hour a day reading and taking notes in this note-taking system. And, you know, might be able to add 5, 6, or more notes each and every day to this system. But I'm not really getting a large return on investment for that effort, for that time and that effort. But I know that there will be a great return on investment if I stick to it long enough. And so when I write a new note, like, let me just turn to sort of a random note here. Here's one called Silos of Notes. That's the name of the note, and its address in the top corner is 4931/2. And this note, I like to think of it, each individual note, as a seed. And I'm planting the seed into the note-taking system. That seed brings me no value. When you, like, if you're planting a garden, the seed that you plant into the ground brings you no value the day after you planted it, right? It has to grow, it has to sprout, it has to mature, and eventually it bears fruit. And so each note that I put into the system, I view it like a seed that I'm planting into this imaginary garden, this imaginary orchard. And so I know that with time, I will stumble upon that note at the right time, and it will be exactly the note that I needed to see at that time to spark a wave of creativity, to spark a new idea, to make a new connection. And that's when I will get that fruit back. But you don't get anything back when you're just planting the seeds. And so this is a system that requires you to put in the effort, to put in the time, hours upon hours, weeks or months, before you get any real return on that investment. And that's not wholly different. That's where trusting the system comes back in. That's not wholly different from a whole lot of other things in our lives, right? Like, you know, if you want to lose weight, if you want to get fit, you know that you should probably go to a gym. You should probably work out every day. You should probably eat healthier. But if you chose today to eat healthier and go to the gym, you wouldn't wake up tomorrow feeling like somehow you're healthier or somehow you're more fit. You'll probably feel worse the first day, right? You're going to be in pain. You're going to be tired. You're going to be sore. You know, if you have to wake up extra early to go to the gym and you haven't fixed your schedule to work around that right, then you'll be kind of sleep deprived, and that'll make you like kind of grumpy. And if you don't get to eat the foods that you really like because you're trying to watch your diet, well, that might make you even more grumpy. And that's a situation that will continue for some time. But you know, like we all know, that if you stuck to going to the gym every day and you ate better than the way you eat now, you will see improvements over time. We all know that because we've all seen people who eat right and go to the gym every day. And after months and months or years of that habit or collection of healthy habits, there is huge transformation in their bodies, right? We see that around us, so we trust it. We know that's a system that is highly trustworthy. It doesn't mean it's a system that we all, you know, engage in, but no one says, I don't go to the gym because I don't believe it would work. No one says I don't diet or I don't watch what I eat because I don't believe it would work. Nobody thinks that it wouldn't work. They might have plenty of other excuses or even reasons for not doing those things, but not believing it would work is never one of them, right? And that's the same with other things. With language learning, as another example I could think of, when you're learning a language, you're studying, you're reading, you're learning vocabulary, but you often hit these periods we call plateaus. A plateau is where you're still putting in all the effort, you're still putting in all the work, and you just don't feel that you are improving at all in your dominance of the language. And sometimes those plateaus can last for weeks or even several months. Imagine you're going to class to learn a language, you're reading books, you're watching movies in the language, you're studying vocabulary, you're doing exercises, you're all kinds of extra things. And you're really trying because you really want to improve in that language, that target language. But you're on that plateau, you don't get any real return for your investment. And then suddenly it just spikes. It just spikes up, and you have this huge return on investment, this huge improvement in your ability to use the language. And then not long after, you might find yourself hitting another plateau. And so this is another example where you have to trust the system, continue to put in that effort, knowing you will eventually get back that return on investment. But you see, the thing is, with the example of going to the gym, that's a great example because we all know people who have transformed their bodies by going to the gym and eating right. The example of learning a language, we probably know somebody who has learned another language, who has braved those plateaus and come out on the other side better for it. And so we kind of have good reasons, good anecdotal evidence to support our also enduring those plateaus and putting in that effort, knowing we will get a return later. But when it comes to something like the Zettelkasten system, making notes on pieces of paper, well, there aren't a lot of people in the world today that are doing this. There aren't a lot of people in the world who take the time to write analog systems like this and then turn it into genius level work. And if you don't know anybody personally who has put in this work and seen that result, well, then you're not alone. Like, most people don't know anybody who has done this. Or the one or two stories that we've read about in a book, like Sanka Aaron's book, How to Take Smart Notes, where is a good place where a lot of people first heard about Nicholas Luhmann, the sociologist who evolved this note-taking system to its current form. Well, that's one example. And that guy, is dead, has been dead for years, right? And so we read about this story. Oh, here's one guy who used this note-taking system and used it to make genius level work and just really push the envelope when it came to the field of sociology. And wow, that's just so amazing. But maybe that was a fluke. That's not perhaps enough evidence in our minds to convince us that we can also brave the plateau and there's something on the other side. So that's where the idea of trust comes in. And so for me personally, in future episodes of the podcast, I'll definitely give updates. But for me personally, I'm choosing to trust that system, knowing that, yes, writing notes by hand produces a certain amount of results right away. Like, you improves your memory. You're able to remember what you wrote down. So that's one return that you get right away. But there's a deep part, of my mind that says if I just sat and read more, I would definitely be more efficient at reading. I would certainly get a lot more reading done if I didn't stop and make these notes all the time. And then if I did want to take handwritten notes, well, you certainly can do that in a notebook and write the notes organized by chapter and by the book that you're reading. And that seems way more efficient for short-term return, right, on your investment of time and energy, because those notes are in a form that are easily accessible and easily digestible in that current form. This system requires a lot more investment, and it cuts off some of that short-term return. But the idea is the long-term results, the long-term return on your investment will be so, so much greater. So that's what I wanted to share with you today, amigo. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch you on the flippity flop.